If you are white and you want to be involved in the medical field in America, apparently you shouldn't be allowed to be in the same area as minority students. At least this is what the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the country, has argued in a shocking article which has evoked the ire of thousands of medical professionals. In fact, 1,000 plus medical professionals have signed a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine condemning their stance here, led by the medical nonprofit Do No Harm. To be exact about what the New England Journal of Medicine believes, here is what they have said in their article. In the article called Racial Affinity Group Caucusing and Medical Education, a key supplement to anti-racism curricula, they said the following. Founded on legacies of colonialism and racism, medical education has historically centered white learners and continues to perpetuate structural racism, adding that the immersion of black students, indigenous, or people of color in the existing medical education system can therefore be re-traumatized, resulting in imposter syndrome, heightened anxiety, and reduced sense of belonging. All of this stuff, according to the New England Journal of Medicine, happens because white students are involved. They go on to propose a solution. They say that racial affinity group caucuses are facilitated sessions involving participants grouped according to self-identified racial or ethnic identity to support integration of anti-racism curricula into clinical practice. Here is the rub. Here is the shocking part of all of this. The article goes on to say that in a space without white people, minority learners can bring their whole selves, heal from racial trauma together, and identify strategies for addressing structural racism. This is one of the most prestigious medical journals in the entire nation arguing for anti-white racial segregation. Now, just very quickly, the name of these groups, racial affinity groups, which is a nice name for segregation, they actually show just how depraved this philosophy of woke segregation and racism, anti-white racism actually is. Because racial affinity groups suggest that you have some kind of commonality with someone by virtue of you looking the same. But this is obviously a fallacy. You may have different values than someone who was raised in a different area or who may look the same as you, because your appearances, your aesthetics, have nothing to do with the contents of your heart. And this would seem like an elementary observation to make to people that would say, oh, this is common sense, Christian, but this actually reflects the materialist philosophy of the woke left. They view the human being not as a spiritual being with higher values and the ability to reason, which distinguishes him from the rest of the earth. No, they see him instead as a abstract person put in a group who is reduced to his barest characteristics. So this just shows how nakedly anti-human this racial affinity nonsense actually is. This shouldn't surprise any of you. I have talked on this channel about the increasing creep of anti-white racism that has entered into America and has become fashionable in many areas in America, when words like white privilege and white guilt are not only fashionable to use, but are a part of the moral lexicon of the establishment class and the intelligentsia and the race grievance class, and they are used to attack white folks for things that they ought not be attacked for, then it should be no surprise that our institutions are capturing the same foul sentiment and they are integrating them into the practices, into the subjects that allow society to survive. Medical science has been the greatest advance for human flourishing in our recent history, but if medical science becomes tainted, if the key for human flourishing becomes tainted by this nonsense, then the implications are vast and they are shocking. Now, it also should not be a surprise that this particularly lives in the medical institutions, because we have seen over the past few months and years medical students completely and utterly pledging themselves to the cult of wokeism, shamelessly. Here is an example of the oath that a group of students at the University of Minnesota, medical students, had to take. Go.
We, the students of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Medical School class of 2026, we commit to uprooting the legacy and perpetuation of structural violence deeply embedded within the healthcare system. We recognize inequities built by past and present traumas rooted in white supremacy, colonialism, the gender binary, ableism, and all forms of oppression. We pledge to honor all Indigenous ways of healing.
Now, here is an example of a similar oath that the Columbia University medical students had to take. Go.
I promise to self-reflect diligently, to confront unconscious prejudices, and to develop the skills, knowledge, and character necessary to engender an inclusive, equitable field of medicine. I acknowledge the past and present failures of medicine to abide by its obligation to do no harm, and affirm the need to address systemic issues in the institutions I uphold. I promise to critically examine the systems and experiences that impact every person's health and ability to receive care. I vow to use this knowledge to uplift my patients and disrupt the injustices that harm them as I forge the future of medicine.
University of Minnesota and Columbia University, both very good schools that are very prestigious, that push out highly trained doctors, have conceded to the woke ideal. They have conceded to this new brand of segregation. They have conceded to this illness, and they are doing so shamelessly. Allow me to pose a thought experiment to all of you. Let us say you are a conservative, and you go into a medical room to get care. Let's say you are a white conservative, just to be more fitting to the analogy we're seeing here. Let's say you go into the room of a woke doctor. A woke doctor who perhaps is propped up by affirmative action or propped up by woke standards of medicine, which have essentially, for many of you who do not know, have involved the elimination of standardized testing to allow black students to get involved in the medical field, because apparently the lack of black students in the medical field is a problem of racial inequity, as opposed to merely a problem of interest and free will, which the woke in their worldview actually deny. That's a different story. Let's say you go into this practice, and it is well known to the doctor that you are a conservative, and it is seen, obviously, that you are a white person. This framework conditions them to treat you differently than a minority patient. The focus is no longer on improving the human being in the abstract, which is what medicine is focused on. The focus is now on this collective abstract group that you, by virtue of merely existing, belong to, and you, by virtue of merely existing in that group, are indicted by and convicted by. This is the idea of ancestral guilt, if I've ever seen it. This is the idea this is the idea of sort of group guilt, if I've ever seen it. This is the idea of collectivism, if I've ever seen it. Yet this is a reality that is fast approaching in America. The unfortunate truth is this, my friends. Ideas precede action. Every behavior you see is preceded by some kind of idea. That idea may not be rational. That idea might not be intelligible. The person doing the behavior may not even know that they're operating under an idea. But ideas precede accomplishment. And this is the simple truth. The more you give someone the wrong ideas about how to interact with the world, the more they will interact with the world in the wrong way. So if you tell doctors that white students have been the key to their oppression, and white supremacy is also an explainer as to why black students have had a hard time in the medical field, rather than lowering of test standards, rather than lowering of expectations for black students, which has been quite large and quite voluminous, if you tell them these things, they will behave as if these things are then therefore true. Their culture of meritocracy will go away. The culture of achievement will go away. The culture of self-responsibility and personal responsibility, all these principles, by the way, which built America and which pioneered the medical field in the first place, they will all go away in the name of collective guilt and in the name of this sort of deterministic philosophy that gets rid of free will and puts everything in the hand of invisible social forces. But there's also a bigger issue. Forget all of that. In this society, there are many people that are mealy-mouthed, that are not brave enough to say what I'm about to say right now. Anti-white racism is just as condemnable, just as vile, just as vicious as racism against black people or Asians. Anti-white racism is just as nasty, and it's perhaps even worse than anything that has ever happened in the history of our nation as it relates to race. How can I say that? Because unlike Jim Crow, which was evidently and obviously wrong and immoral, and there was a very clear reason to fight against it, anti-white racism has managed to capture our institutions, has managed to become verified and acceptable by some of the major voices in our society, politicians, journalists, academics. It has been legitimized by the power structure. So unlike Jim Crow, where it can be fought with much social appraisal, anti-white racism is affirmed by the institutions of society, and therefore cannot be fought without one being called a bigot, a racist, or some kind of other epithet meant to delegitimize them in the eyes of good-natured, good-meaning, but misled people. That is the danger. When you have a society where someone can merely attack you by virtue of your skin color, when you have a society where someone can kick you out of a student lounge, which would happen at University of Arizona, because of your skin color, you have a society that does not value pluralism or individualism. It values collectivism. It values you, not as an individual, but as merely a product of your skin color, a product of your identity, not any higher creature. You see, man is not merely a product of his environment or identity. Man is a higher creature, a spiritual being, endowed with reason, with the ability to understand the world for what it is, not what he wants it to be, and then to conform his behavior to the law of the universe so that he might live fruitfully and people around him might live fruitfully, he might live morally. This is the entire idea America is founded upon. But the moment this contrary identity-based nonsense comes and attacks that idea is the moment the standard of value shifts in our society. And yet, no one wants to talk about this because they view white folks, the woke view white folks, as merely benefactors of this invisible system that they are all a part of by virtue of being white. It's a non sequitur. It's an association fallacy. It's wrong on so many levels, both moral and practical. And yet, it is becoming the governing philosophy of our medical institutions. My friends, we have to be courageous and condemn this form of racism as much as we would any other form of racism. We must also be courageous and condemn any attempt to endorse racism in the name of fighting it, whether that be on the woke side or whether that be the backlash to this that comes from many good-natured white people. We must all also embrace the fundamental first principle ideas that constitute so many subjects like math and science and medicine and reading, as opposed to allowing contrary ideas that see them all as tools of power to use in their conquest, to condemn and conquer America, instead of allowing them to overtake these subjects and get rid of first principles. We need a revolution of the mind, my friends. We need a revolution of the mind that all of you can be a part of. My friends, love you guys so much. Like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. Please be sure to donate to me if you want to. My locals in the comment section down below. Everything's there. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.